The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, November 28, 2016. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Take a day off and eat way too much day is what it should be called. Not to mention all the historical baggage of Thanksgiving, but that was last week's episode. I'm not going to regurgitate that again. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. I don't take it for granted. I appreciate it. And hopefully we can have some conversations that will either uplift your day or shine a light on the bullshit. Either it could go either way with us, right? So that's what we're here to do, of course. And always, I must start by thanking my patrons for making this happen. Special shout out to Nicole H. for becoming a patron. Michael Lake, thanks so much for becoming a patron. Nick, thanks so much for becoming a patron. And another Eric, thank you so much for becoming a patron. By becoming a patron, you get access to our bonus shows. We typically do a Friday bonus show, and whenever I can, I do my best to do a bonus show after each show. Last week some weeks are better than the others, right? But we do give you your bonus show on Friday, unless it's a holiday, right? So all these disclaimers. But the point is, you can become a supporter of the Benjamin Dixon Show by going to patreon.com/the BPD Show. The BPD Show. That's what it is. All right, folks. A whole lot happening in the news. So much, in fact, that I'm going to have to just plow through it. It's quite a bit. I do want to have you join the conversation as always, 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. I'm trying to decide where I want to plant my flag and get started tonight, probably with the North Dakota governor issuing a statement demanding an evacuation of all of the protesters at Standing Rock. And I'm going to pull an image on your screen so that you can see what we're talking about. But essentially, if you read the entire statement, this Republican governor is essentially saying, due to the inclement weather, right, because it's so cold out there, I'm demanding an evacuation. But essentially, he's opening up the door to give authorities even more authority to forcibly remove the water protectors, the protesters, the people who are there on the scene. Governor Darlimp. I'm going to go with Darlimp. That looks like the name. I guess that's the best way I can pronounce it. But he issued a evacuation order today, later on this afternoon, slightly before the show started. And I'm going to read a little bit of it as I can get a chance to pull it up. But a lot of other things are happening around this that I think are very interesting, and I think it's worthwhile discussing. One, it's interesting to see the level to which the current administration is trying to punt this football. Their responsibility to the people, the responsibility to the tribals' lands, the responsibility to their treaties and that they have with the Sioux tribe and the various tribes that are represented there. It's amazing how much the Democrats are punting the ball on this, to the extent that it's a deafening silence / a slap in your face when you realize that there is not a political party who is actually on the side of the people in general, the environment. It's just there's so many confluences here, so many things that intersect each other here that it becomes almost a much bigger issue than anyone is willing to delve into, at least from politically speaking. Most people are avoiding this, except, those who find they're clear-eyed enough to land on the right side of this. right? You have those like Bernie Sanders who's out there protesting with the water protectors. And then you have people like what's the guy who had his eye socket blown out or something? I can't, for a senator from Nevada, just retired. I can't think of his name. Harry Reid. You have Harry Reid who tried to make this an issue and lay this at the feet of Donald Trump. Now, I'm happy to say that I think Donald Trump is a piece of shit, and everything is his fault. As soon as he takes office, he's not in office. This is not a problem for Donald Trump. This is a problem for President Obama. This is a problem that he could wade in on and could, and it's not without precedent for them to reroute this pipeline. I think that's the thing that jumps out the most to me, because it was rerouted in the first place to avoid going through a predominantly white neighborhood, because they did not want the potential, the risk of oil poisoning their water. So they rerouted this through Native American tribal lands. And now all of a sudden, everybody's silent. So again, you have issues of withholding our end of the bargain, our treaties with Native tribes, Native American tribes. We have environmental racism. We have the overreach of police on behalf of capital, right? We have the militarization of our police on behalf of business interests. This is not surprising, right? I'm not acting shocked. This is what they have historically done, but it's always interesting to see it slap you in the face all over again, because here they are there to forward and protect the interests of business and capital, even if it means using water cannons to fire hose down protesters in freezing weather. So I don't know how this ends. I do know it looks as though by the order of the governor, it looks as though it's going to get worse before it gets better. It looks as though they're looking to crack down on anyone who remains. Looks as though they're really ready to forcibly remove all the protesters, and this evacuation order is exactly what they need to do it. This is exactly what they need to, as an excuse enough to forcibly remove the protesters, even more so than they're trying to do now. All right, so this is the statement from Governor Dalrymple. That is a crazy ass last name. Anyway, so the justification is hilarious to me. He says, whereas Martin County is currently experiencing severe winter weather storm conditions, and it is anticipated harsh winter conditions will continue until next spring. And whereas the winter conditions have the potential to endanger human life, whereas large populations have chosen to stay, whereas the aforementioned areas of Morton County are not zoned for dwellings suitable for living in winter conditions, whereas the United States Army Corps of Engineers has ordered at the aforementioned area of Morton County, which they managed to be vacated due to public safety concerns, blah, blah, blah. Whereas it is the responsibility of the state. You get the picture. This is all for the governor. This is only about how harsh the winter is. And this is what you do. Now, therefore, I, Jack, whatever the hell your last name is, governor of the state of North Dakota, order a mandatory evacuation of all persons located in areas under the proprietary jurisdiction of the United States Army Corps of Engineers located in Morton County and defined as a prohibited area in Exhibit A of the United States Army Corps of Engineers memorandum provided by the Morton County Sheriff on November 20, blah, 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 blah. So there you have it. All persons in the evacuation area shall take all their personal possessions with them upon their evacuation. Let's see. He turns up a little bit in here. Let me scroll back up. Any action or inaction taken by any party which encourages persons to enter, re-enter, or remain in the evacuation area will be subject to penalties as defined in law. I direct state agencies, this is the governor continued. He said, I direct state agencies, emergency service officials, and non-governmental organizations to reduce threats to public safety by not guaranteeing the provision of emergency and other governmental and non-governmental services in the evacuation area unless otherwise approved on a case-by-case basis by the Morton County Sheriff. Blah, blah, blah. The general public is hereby notified that emergency services probably will not be available under current weather conditions. Listen, you're North Dakota. It is, yes, it's cold as hell, right? It is cold, and there is a winter storm coming through, but this is North Dakota. That's like saying we need to shut down a portion of Boston because we have 2 feet of snow. I mean, we don't do that. Life goes on. People live in winter conditions. So we know off rip that this is just a cover for the interest of the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is it. That's it. This is 100% about finding a way to forcibly remove the protesters from the scene. And he's saying, just in case you're wondering, we're encouraging all of the NGOs, all of the organizations, all of the entities that have been providing material support to the protesters that they should no longer do that. In other words, we're trying to essentially put a blockade. If people remain, we're going to blockade you in the sense that no services or supplies can get into you. I mean, it's a tradition almost as old as time, right? You blockade people in, you place their territory underneath siege and you starve them out. People have been doing that since the Peloponnesian War. Except now we can do it underneath the auspices of, oh, it's cold and it's inclement winter weather. The fuck out of here, man. Nobody is born yesterday. All right, let's see what else he said in here. I haven't finished reading the entire thing. Any person who chooses to enter, re-enter, or stay in the evacuation does so at their own risk and assumes any and all corresponding liabilities for their unlawful presence and occupation of the evacuation order. So there you have it. Governor Dermapimple. How do you pronounce his name? I'm sure everybody's yelling at the computers by now. Dalrymple. Governor Jack Dalrymple is using the power of the governorship to declare a state of emergency, essentially, an evacuation order for an area that should be pretty damn accustomed to inclement winter weather. I mean, that's like, I mean, come on. Seriously? You expect people to believe that? No, you don't. I don't think you even care. You just needed a reason to kick the people out of there. All right, caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, this is Bryce. What's going on?
Hey, Bryce, what's happening, man? What's on your mind?
Well, obviously everything that's happening in North Dakota is sad and it needs to change. And, you know, I guess it doesn't matter who's president. You know, it's still just a lot of nonsense that's going on. And
for sure.
I don't know if it's going to be fixed. But I did want to talk about Fidel Castro situation. So obviously I know that Fidel has a lot of problems. He did a lot of bad things. We know about that. But can you elaborate and talk about, there are good sides to him, with Malcolm X and Nelson Mandela and Dr. King and a lot of things he had with race, and he was able to stop America from pulling, imperialism on his country.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, don't get me wrong, I know he did a lot of bad things. I know people might be upset about, people might feel like, how can you, give him any type of credit for all the bad stuff he did. But he did a lot of good things. And not to mention that, America, we really can't talk bad about other countries.
Hang on, Bryce.
Benjamin.
Bryce, you were on a roll, and I hit the wrong button, man. But go ahead.
Sorry.
Totally listen. Keep going.
Sorry. But yeah, we really can't talk about other countries with our nonsense, stuff that we do, like our policies and things of that nature. So I think that shows a lot of hypocrisies of us as a country. But yeah, I know Fidel has his problems. We understand all that.
Yeah.
But I hate when the media and people, push aside the good things.
Yeah.
I was going on Facebook about the whole situation.
Yep.
People were getting mad at me. Don't get mad at me. I'm speaking the truth. We know we can acknowledge his problems.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
let's talk about Malcolm and others.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like a plan. I definitely going to cover that. Bryce, thanks for the call. 857-600-0518. Sorry about that, folks. I totally hit the wrong button. I'm going to talk about Castro in a minute. Probably to talk about him at length. Let me, Bryce, if you don't mind, let me table that call. The answer to that question until after I've covered some more news, because there's so much happening in the news, and the Fidel Castro conversation is probably going to be a lengthy one. But I promise you, it is on my list of things to get through tonight. In other news, and thanks so much for the call, man. I do appreciate it. We definitely will cover that issue. So a couple of other things that's happening in the news. So today, there was an attack at Ohio State University. And it went out as an active shooter situation. And it turned out that it wasn't an active shooter, but it was a stabbing. It was a Somalian student, a student at Ohio State University, drove into a crowd of people, jumped out, and began stabbing people. I believe 11 people were hospitalized, and they were either hospitalized for being stabbed or being hit by the car. The attacker drove his car into a group and then jumped out, started stabbing people. And after about 2 minutes, the student was shot and killed by an officer. The student's name was Abul Razak Al-Atan. So he's had grievances. If we're going to unpack the motivations, he stated and mentioned grievances about attacks on Muslims on a Facebook post, on a Facebook page that authorities believe belonged to the student. The attack on Ohio State's Columbus campus, it only lasted 2 minutes, but it was enough for him to injure 11 people. So the interesting thing, let me pull this up on the screen. The best thing I can do is pull this up on the screen. The student had previously been profiled by a local paper, and you can see here's a picture of the student in a profile, and they gave a little bit of background about his motivations, his reasons for being a student there at Ohio State, and just kind of profiled him as a normal student, normal human being, which most people are until they no longer are. A lot of people are asking why. Why did he do this? Well, I mean, we can ask this question anytime someone commits a quote-unquote act of terror. But I really haven't seen many people connect the expansion of America's footprint in Somalia. And by footprint, I mean bombing. Not a lot of people are referencing this because they don't want to ever give voice to the fact that we create our own terrorists sometimes, a lot of times. Probably more times than not, we have in some way created our own terrorists. And as Jeremiah Wright, who I am going to bring back into the mainstream, I'm going to interview Jeremiah Wright, and I'll tell you why. But as Jeremiah Wright stated many years ago, a lot of times this is blowback and our chickens are coming home to roost. But nobody wants to ever discuss that narrative because it actually puts you in a position where you have to look at America through a critical lens and say that everything America does is not good and just and right. And sometimes the things that we do ultimately radicalizes people, even people within our own borders, or especially people within our own borders. That being said, President Obama today, the Obama administration declared that Al-Shabaab, which is an Islamist militant organization, the Obama administration declared that that they are a part of the armed conflict that Congress authorized against the perpetrators of September 11th, 9/11. So the authorization of use of military force that we got shortly after 9/11 has been extended beyond 15 years, beyond Afghanistan, beyond the region, beyond Iraq, all the way to Somalia, which is in Africa, pretty long way away. I guess there's no geographical limitation to where Islamists can go, clearly. But the mere fact that we're using the same authorization of use of military force, AUMF, to justify the expansion of the bombings that we've already been engaged in Somalia is pretty ridiculous at this point. And that's an understatement. You would think that at the end, and shout out to Glenn Greenwald, because he actually posited this first this morning, or at least that's the first person I saw who mentioned this. But you would think that in his exiting days, President Obama would rein in some of the overreach, the executive overreach, as to not put it into the hands of a psychopath like Donald Trump, a sociopath, at least mentally unfit to be president at a minimum, right? Everything else might have been hyperbolic, but he's clearly not healthy enough mentally to serve as a president of the United States. And you would think that President Obama would rein in some of that executive overreach. But in these final days before he hands over the White House to a madman, he has extended the executive authority to wage war with an authorization that is older than some kids in high school right now. So again, to be sure, this has been going on for much longer. And I'm talking about this in context of the student today. The Somalian student who just seemed to just randomly, like, he didn't even prepare for this. He didn't go get a gun. He literally drove his car into a crowd, jumped out. All he had was a knife. And nobody's going to talk about that, or maybe it's just coincidence. It's just coincidence. It had nothing to do with Obama's overreach in Somalia, and the bombing and the droning in Somalia. So anyway, let's give you an example. So underneath the 2001 authorization, the United States is engaged in conflict with a specific organization, not every Islamist militant in the world, but that authority has proved to be elastic enough to not just go after the people who were originally targeted in the 2001 authorization. It's elastic enough. We can stretch that enough to reach over to not even just the single organization, not just the geographical region, but across continents to a third-tier organization. Now, to be sure, could it be that Al-Shabaab presents a vital threat that needs to be handled? I think anyone who won't admit that probably is not being genuine in this conversation. However, that doesn't preclude the problem. The fact that Al-Shabaab probably should be wiped off the face of the earth and the earth will be made better for it does not absolve President Obama and this administration and previous administrations and subsequent administrations for the executive overreach to carry this out. I mean, we do have a method. And don't get me wrong, our Congress is shit. Our Congress is intransigent. They don't want to do anything. But I think if you could get them to do anything, you could probably get the Republicans to sign off on war. However, we haven't been able to do so because they're cowards. The reason the president is so free to have this executive overreach is because Congress does not want to vote on another authorization of use of military force. They do not want to vote on war. Their job is to give the president authority to wage war and to provide a budget. And 2 out of 2 of those things they don't do. They punt and leave it in the hands of the executive branch. So it's not just Obama here, right? It's all of America that's complicit with what's happening. And the question is, at what point are we going to say, yeah, that's one overreach too far? I mean, clearly, if we had viewed this through the lens of 2001, immediately after 9/11, if we had foreseen this authorization of use of military force being expanded to include other organizations, other continents for 15 years, even in the backdrop of the worst terrorist attack in the United States of America, we would have said, no, that's too much and too far. And the reason I bring it up like that is because we have gradually and meticulously worn down our resistance to war, our resistance to the executive branch waging war without the authorization of the people. We've become numb to this, such to the point where it's not even a big deal. I could have not talked about this tonight, and maybe half of my audience would have been like, well, whatever. Other half would have been like, Ben, you're a corporate stooge. You can't win for losing. But the point is that we've become numb to it. And this is just kind of expected. So I'm going to be surprised. Strike that. Start over. I'm not going to be surprised when all of a sudden, when Trump has this same exact authority and he abuses it in the same fashion as President Obama, I am not going to be surprised to see all of the liberal talking heads feign outrage over executive overreach after 8 years of being silent about President Obama. Relatively silent, or silent enough not to give him a political cost, right? We can't stop President Obama unless the people rise up and demand, right? And literally millions of people march and say, bring this to an end. But we're not even extracting political cost. His approval rating is 57%. So when people ask, like, why did this Somalian student snap? If they don't talk about what America is doing in Somalia, then they're not equipped to have that conversation. They're just fear mongering, or they want to whitewash America, which we do all the damn time, all the time. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question? Shoot.
My name is Isha, and so I originally called in to kind of just quickly, like, I was doing some research on every idiotic senator, congressperson who critiqued Obama or like Jeremy Corbyn or anyone for saying like the generic vague words on Castro, to see how they reacted to King Abdullah, the Saudi tyrant, a year ago.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to quickly go through that. But one comment, before I do that, can I make a quick comment about Al-Shabaab?
Yep, go for it.
A lot of the Al-Shabaab recruits are actually a minority from the south of Somalia who were nomadic, and basically they've been like pushed off their lands for the less nomadic but more like westernized ethnic majority in Somalia. So I just wanted to let you know. So they do have a legitimate grievance. So one thing that really, really shocked me is, like New York Times, Washington Post, on Fidel Castro, they said, the title says, Fidel Castro's Terrible Legacy.
Right.
King Abdullah, who basically like sentenced protesters protesting for democracy to death. Like Washington Post said, Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, a wily king who embraced limited reform. And he actually like executed people who wanted democracy, dies today. New York Times, King Abdullah, a shrewd force who reshaped Saudi Arabia, dies at 90. Obama basically, if you like look at Obama, he basically said, our countries work together to confront many challenges, and I always valued King Abdullah's perspective and appreciated our genuine and warm friendship. And he actually just like dropped everything to go to King Abdullah's funeral. There's a picture of Colin Powell at his funeral. Also look at this. in any event, Rubio won't be the only Republican senator missing some business on the Senate floor this week, as Armed Services Chairman John McCain said he was also heading to Saudi Arabia for King Abdullah's funeral as part of an 8-person Senate delegation.
Yep.
And not one of these people, like Daryl Issa, complained about how Obama didn't talk about human rights. Well, Daryl Issa went to King Abdullah's funeral. So not one person where Fidel Castro banned the death penalty in 2005.
Yep.
Saudi Arabia beheads more than ISIS. So I just wanted to show that it's like you said something about how we have our favorite murderous dictators.
Yeah.
Well, I have research to prove that we do have our favorite murderous dictators.
We absolutely do. Thanks, Isha, so much for that call. I see. I got to go ahead and talk about Fidel Castro here because it seems like that's what the audience wants to talk about. But you're absolutely right. We do have our preferred dictators. We have our preferred murderous dictators, and without question, we hold others accountable to things that we would not hold Saudi Arabia accountable for. Seems like we have to talk about Fidel Castro. Let me start here with Fidel Castro. Actually, the only thing I want to talk about is really what the last caller just brought up, is the hypocrisy of America. And don't get me wrong, I think it's worthwhile to talk about Castro in context of Castro, right? But I have no desire to do that, because with every single actor, there is no good, there is no evil. I'm sorry. I don't believe. Listen, I come from a religious background, and I don't try to attribute people's actions, human beings' actions, to simply being good or evil. I think actors do what's in their best interest, and they're willing to break whatever rules that they are allowed to get away with breaking, period. And so in context, the reason I bring that up is in context of Fidel Castro, there is going to be both good and extremely bad. There's going to be extremely good things that he did ban the death penalty. They had the highest literacy rate in the world, right? Higher than the United States of America. I mean, more doctors, medical doctors from as per capita. I mean, they've done some pretty, but you can't say that in America, because Castro is on the list of dictators, murderous dictators that we don't approve of. And let's be sure, America has an approved list of murderous dictators. America has an approved list of sponsors of terrorism. You have some nations who straight out Saudi Arabia, who sponsors terrorism. 19 of the hijackers on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. You have nations who are sponsors of terrorism that are not on the official list of state sponsors of terrorism. So you have Saudi Arabia, who's okay with the United States, but Iran, who's not okay with the United States. And I think it was FDR who was the first person that I can track it back to, who said, in reference to a dictator, he said he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And that's essentially the thinking of the United States of America. And so whereas they're trying to extract a political cost for people, anybody who would have a nuanced, forget about having a positive conversation about Castro, right? If you have a positive conversation about Castro, I mean, you're pretty much going to be attacked, lambasted. But if you try to have a nuanced conversation about Fidel Castro, then you're going to also be attacked. And that's because Castro has been hated by the United States of America since day one. And over 638 attempts by the CIA to assassinate Castro, all of them failed. Castro still came around and died on his own terms, like after all those attempts to assassinate him. And I want you to just compare now. I want you to just think about this, though. Really think about this. You have what do they accuse him of? Suppressing dissent, taking political prisoners, torturing people. cracking down on journalism, on the freedom of press. I mean, let's list all the things that he did, right? You know what he ultimately did? He seized pride. You know what he ultimately did that really put him at odds with the United States first, right? Before anything else was his Marxist point of view, worldview. His overthrow of a previous dictator who was far right, who wanted to exploit the labor of Cubans. He overthrew one dictator and came in with his own regime, his Marxist regime. And because he became an enemy of the United States during the time where the world was simply trying to, I don't even know, it was a pure ideological battle. It was a pure ideological battle between proponents of capitalism and proponents of communism, particularly Marxism. There was no greater enemy to the United States than anyone who forwarded an idea that challenged American capitalism, which actually should be translated as American imperialism. None. Nobody was a greater enemy. And so this is where the starting point of the hatred of today, right? Today's very visceral response towards Fidel Castro is tied all the way back to the fact that he challenged American imperialism. And I remember watching an interview with Nelson Mandela that was brilliant. This guy asked him, like, how can you side? How can you speak positively of a murderous? This is their catchphrase. He's a murderous dictator. Okay, yeah. How can you? And Fidel he was asked about Fidel Castro, and he stated very simply. He said, our relationship with Cuba or with any nation is not going to be predicated by America's relationship with them. And so if you have an American-centric worldview, then of course you're going to view Fidel Castro as the devil. Because it clearly cannot be about his dictatorial regime. It can't be about that. Not when we are bosom buddies with Saudi Arabia. It can't be about that. It can't be about the fact that he uses torture when fucking Guantanamo Bay is the location of America's greatest examples in modern history of torture. I mean, we're murderous. We commit acts of torture. We are in bed with murderous dictatorial regimes who suppress dissent. I mean, we are everything that Fidel Castro, that we are mad at Fidel Castro about being. And if we're not those exact things, right, being hyperbolic, right? If we are not those exact things, then we're clearly in league with nations that are far worse. If you want to do the scale and measuring, I mean, how many weekly, daily beheadings? Right now, the daughters of the Saudi king, they're under house arrest because they spoke against they spoke out in terms of women's rights in Saudi Arabia. So now they're on house arrest. I mean, the king's daughters. What do you think he would have done to just women? Now, the reason Nelson Mandela actually had positive relationships with Fidel Castro is because Fidel Castro sided with Nelson Mandela during apartheid. Provided support to end apartheid South Africa. He was in league with Malcolm X, just any number of people who were on the side of racial justice. So if the question comes up and says, is Fidel Castro a hero or a bastard? I'm going to say, just like everybody else in the world, he's both. And it depends on who you ask. And it depends on what nation or what interests are involved. Because if you're going to make that kind of judgment about Castro over his dictatorial reign, over the suppressive dissent and the torture and the people who were murdered and disappeared, then clearly you are going to do the same exact thing about America's current relationships. but they're not, because they won't, because they can't, because they don't really care about human rights. They only care if the person who is in power is friendly to American interest. That's it. So it goes back to the saying about every dictator, every murderous dictator. They may be a son of a bitch, but they're our son of a bitch. And if they're not our son of a bitch, then we have to get rid of the son of a bitch. Saddam Hussein was our flunky until he was no longer our flunky. And as soon as he no longer was underneath the control of the CIA, we began making plans to get rid of him. Period. End of conversation. Now, if you still want to talk about it, if people still want have a problem with this conversation, then we could really boil it down to the very simplistic. We can reduce this down to what it really is about. It's about American capitalism and imperialism. And one of the few leaders, world leaders, who survived and challenged American imperialism for over 50 years. Like, I mean, the USSR fell, but Fidel Castro was still there. Now, to be sure, I don't even know if I want to give that disclaimer. I'm gonna let everything that I said stand and let people who have a problem with it have a problem with it. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. 857-600-0518. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Yes, me, Scotty.
Scotty, what's happening, my dude?
Nothing much. When I woke up this morning, I was informed about what was going on in Ohio State, and you talk about it hitting close to home. Like,
yeah,
it was really kind of surreal because I was actually supposed to be going to school around this time, and I decided to go in spring. So, and plus, like a number of my family members and friends go there, so it was really kind of like, it was really stressful. And then I'm just glad that everybody's okay. By the way, the paper you're talking about, the local paper, is actually the school paper, the Lantern,
okay.
that he was profiling.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, and it's really surreal because now I saw that CARE, the Ohio chapter of CARE, had to do a press conference where they had to condemn the actions of the student. And, I don't know if people know this, but Columbus, Ohio actually happens to have the second largest Somali American population in the country. And, I just hope that this doesn't mean that people are going to start attacking Somali citizens over this. Because, we don't need that. We don't need the Islamophobia. We don't need the racism. We've already got that much in Trump, but we don't need that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just glad that everybody's okay at OSU, and that's all I gotta say.
Thanks so much for the call, man. It's always a pleasure. But most definitely, I saw, I don't know if it was a Facebook post. I'm not really sure what it was, but I saw someone who basically made the same statement that you just made, basically saying that that there's such a huge Somalian community there in Columbus, and that this was a problem with one Somalian, not all of the Somalian students and community members there. So most certainly, man, I'm gonna echo that sentiment that we want to people to chill the hell out and not escalate this into something more. Yeah. All right. So in other news, a couple of other things that have happened on the international stage that we have to discuss. It seems to me that we are entering into a stage of the ascent of, or the reemergence of, right-wing populism. We saw the first wave with Nigel Farage and Brexit. Second wave, clearly the ascendancy of Donald Trump to the White House. And now we see the possibility of France going the same route as America and as Britain, Great Britain, with the election of Francois Fillon, or the potential election. So this race is very interesting to me, right? So Francois Fillon is a right-wing hardliner, and he is leading the essentially the Republican Party there in France. He beat out the more moderate opponent, 66% to 33%. So it was a massive blowout. What's most interesting about this to me is that France now is in a position where they have a choice between a hard right conservative or a far right nationalist, ethno-nationalist. Their choices are not particularly good right now. So in many ways, no matter what happens, whoever is elected, unless I think the Socialist Party, unless they actually stand a chance of winning, which it doesn't look like they are. But either way it goes, France looks like it's going to be led by a hard right-leaning nationalist. So Francois Fillon has co-opted the language of his opponent, Le Pen, Marie Le Pen, who espoused the same type of anti-Islamic, xenophobic vitriol that we've seen spread globally. And so he co-opted that language, and it was a rounding massive success, such that he beat his opponent by 33 points. So now France has a choice between a hard right nationalist who wants to gut the public sector, who wants to gut the welfare state, who wants to get rid of the 35-hour work week. He wants to cut 500,000 public jobs. He wants to scrap the wealth tax. I mean, he wants to go in and fundamentally reshape. Basically, he's the Margaret Thatcher. That's exactly what he represents. And on top of that, Islamophobia to boot. Or Marie Le Pen, who is a far-right nationalist, sympathetic white supremacist. The same, this is an amazing time to see on the world stage the pendulum swings so far back to the right, where now a nation like France doesn't have a choice between a moderate and on the global stage, we've not had a choice between a leftist and someone on the right for my entire life. That was pretty much done. I can't say on the international stage, but in the United States, it was done since the 80s. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about the choice between a moderate and the far right. France has a choice between the far right and the further right. So, Francois Fillon, it looks like, the polls say that he can beat Marie Le Pen, right? But the polls also said that Donald Trump was going to get mollywopped by Hillary Clinton. I find it interesting that some people are casting this narrative, the story, this situation in France as being one similar to everything else. And here's a photo of Marie Le Pen that's happening. But this is a little bit different for every reason I've already outlined. This is not your neoliberal versus a nationalist populist. This is a hard right, Reagan-esque, Thatcher-esque conservative who wants to destroy the entire welfare state, the safety net structure, versus someone who probably would not destroy the safety net, but is running 100% purely on the hatred of, and I know that's hyperbolic, but bear with me, the hatred of Muslims. I would ask what's going on as if I didn't know. But the fact of the matter is that it is so easy. It is so easy for people to scapegoat and turn that scapegoating into hatred and turn that hatred into nationalism. And that there's only one quick step from nationalism to ethno-nationalism, right? It's so easy for people to do that. And I know a lot of people are sitting on their moral high horses saying that there's no reason whatsoever that we should try to identify with people who lean towards these hard right ethno-nationalist politicians simply because they've had economic struggles. It's pretty easy and convenient for you to say that when you don't have economic struggles. But I've seen firsthand people transform from being leftist, damn near Marxist, into being ethno-nationalists for the sake of their economic plight. It sounds absurd. It sounds ridiculous, but I've seen it happen in this election cycle. And I've seen it happen to some brilliant minds. It is only one step when you're talking about people who cannot pay their bills, who cannot afford food, when people who work 40 years and have nothing to show for it, or people who realize, even worse, people who have been working for 20 years and realize they have nothing to show for it and they're not going to have a retirement. It's only one step from that to embracing a scapegoat. And that scapegoat is usually being promulgated by an ethno-nationalist. That's what's going on. You have the majority of the world who has been just completely devastated by this economic paradigm that shall never be criticized by neoliberals or conservatives. But while the rest of the world, the majority of the world, is being exploited and plundered, you have opportunistic bastards like Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, and Francois Fillon, for that matter, who ride in on the white horse of nationalism, of white nationalism, white supremacy. And it's not just white people, white skin, pale face, who fall into this trap. I've seen people of color fall into this trap. So at some point, we who realize that these people are falling into the cesspool and the pipe dream of even worse laissez-faire capitalism combined with white nationalism, ethno-nationalism, they're falling into a trap that's only going to make their situation worse. Those of us who know that, clearly we have a responsibility to find a solution to the problem that makes them such easy fodder and prey for white nationalist populists. In other words, if we know that the white working class and some people of color working class are vulnerable to a populist message that vilifies Mexicans and anybody else, if we know that's the problem, we are irresponsible and politically inept if we do not offer a solution that will drag them away from the white nationalists. But instead of looking for that solution globally, what our liberals have done is just decided to lecture and point and stare and really sternly look and say, cut that out. Stop being racist. You're being racist. You supported Donald Trump. You're a racist. Instead of saying, it actually makes sense in the minds of people when they can't get a job because they've been undercut by an illegal worker, undocumented worker. That's the easiest. That's so easy. When you talk about keep it simple, stupid, the message that you're poor, you're broke. You know why you're broke? Because those illegal immigrants have undercut your wages. It's so much simpler than the conversation of the reason those immigrants undercut your wages is because corporations are desperate for cheap labor. And no matter what we do, they're going to always try to encourage illegal immigration so that they can have a bountiful source of undocumented workers that they don't have to pay the minimum wage to. Which one do you think is going to attract people more? The easy one sentence scapegoat. And this is what's happening globally. Everybody's problems are being blamed on the foreigner. And when you can easily scapegoat communities like that, you're going to see Brexit, you're going to see Donald Trump, and you're going to see FREXIT. You're going to see France embrace a hard right. Now, this is all they have right now. Hard right or further right. While the neoliberals run around the world saying, shame on you, racist. You need to repent of your white supremacy. Tell us how you've learned. Bow down and listen to us while we tell you how your privilege is problematic. Meanwhile, the racists and the white nationalists are building coalitions globally and gaining power. Shame on us. Shame on us if we don't fix the problem that has empowered white nationalism, ethno-nationalism, xenophobia, and bigotry globally. Speaking of bigots globally, Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines has decided that it's in their best interest to go ahead and ban this gentleman who was on a flight last week who referred to Hillary Clinton supporters as Hillary bitches, and they banned him for life. Prior to banning him for life, they gave this milquetoast answer, which was pretty weak tea. But I'll read the. Actually, before I read that, I want to play a clip of the gentleman. It's just being what you 100% would expect from a person who supports a piece of shit like Donald Trump. Sorry, it is what it is. That's who he is. That's what Donald Trump is. And so I want to play the clip. Here is this guy on a Delta Flight 284 from, where was he going from? He was going from Allentown, from Atlanta to Allentown, Pennsylvania. All right, here you go. This is your dude.
How many people, man? Really? Ain't nobody gonna say no shit on this plane? We can't hear you. You can't hear me? Donald Trump, baby. That's right, this man knows what's up. We got some Hillary bitches on here. Come on, baby. Trump. That's what I thought. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, baby. Donald Trump. It's your president. Every goddamn one of you. If you don't like it, too bad.
I'm laughing, man, because damn it, I can't get on a plane with my beard too long without somebody looking at me crazy. If this man had been black, this man had been, God forbid if this man had been Muslim or of Arab descent. Oh my God. Like the FBI, the Homeland Security, I mean, fucking snipers would have been everywhere by the time they escorted him off the plane. But not only did they not escort him permanently off the plane, they allowed him to fly to his destination. And this is something I'm talking about on a regular basis. Like, white conservative men have more privilege than any other group in America, right? White conservative men can pull a gun, have their gun out on a police officer, and the police officer is going to give them the benefit of the doubt because, they have a right to the Second Amendment. Second Amendment. Right? You see all these examples of white men pointing guns at police officers, and go home to live and tell their wife about it. Maybe they get arrested. And you have all these examples of black men or black women unarmed getting killed within seconds of entering on the scene. White conservative men. Yes, white men are privileged. Yes. Yes, white people in general are privileged. Yes. White straight men are I get all that. But white conservative men get to do this kind of shit on a plane and fly to their destination. And it's only because of the backlash of social media. It's only because of that they decided to even go back and look at this and to ban him permanently. So here's their first response, their milk toke response. It said, Delta issued the following statement regarding Flight 248 from Atlanta to Allentown, Pennsylvania on November 22nd. We are sorry to our customers who experienced this disruption. We have followed up with the teams involved and all agree that this customer should not have been allowed to continue on the flight. Our responsibility for ensuring all customers feel safe and comfortable with Delta includes requiring civil behavior from everyone. The behavior we see in this video does not square with our training or culture, and follow-up will continue so we can better ensure our employees will know they will be fully supported to make the right decisions when issues arise. In other words, the employees were scared to escort this white man, this white conservative man, off the plane. But let it have been my black ass, I would have been off in 0.2 seconds. I wouldn't even finish. I would not have been able to get forget black power. They would have caught me at and escorted my black ass off the plane. But they were afraid of this white conservative man, afraid enough to let him stay on the plane. Telling you, man. I don't even know if there's anything else to say about that other than they finally got to him. They finally decided to ban him for life. It's because you had power players on, you had like national figures, you had celebrities, Taraji P. Henson, you had Gabrielle Union, you had Michael Skolnick, you had Sean King, you had all kinds of people basically saying we are platinum members of whatever rewards program you have, and we're going to take our business elsewhere. And after that got retweeted about 50,000 times, then finally they said, okay, we have to do something with this dude. I just you can't make this up. So congratulations, Delta. You did the right thing only after the public pressured you to do what you should have done from the beginning. If America was equitable, if everyone was equal, then this vile piece of human vermin would have been treated exactly like you treat people of Arab descent who are on their cell phones and looking at Arabic on their phones instead of English. They get put off the plane. All right, a couple of other things happening in the news and we get out of here. Oh, actually, it's already 10 o'clock. Oh, man, time flies when you're having fun. Let's see, what did I cover? So, man, no, actually, I didn't cover a lot. I apologize. We're running out of time. So I wanted to talk about the Syrian Arab army gaining ground in Aleppo. I'm going to have to cover that later. And also some interesting news from San Francisco, like the BART system was hijacked and hacked and all sorts of things. But I'm going to be broadcasting from Chicago the rest of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I'll be in Chicago. What's up, Chi-Town? If y'all know something that's popping in Chi-Town, let me know. I'll be glad to come check out some events when I have some free time, if I have some free time. But I will be broadcasting live on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from Chicago. And I want you to be there. So until then, I think that's it. Good night.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
It's Ben Dixon!
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.